The member for Fadden.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. 12 months ago, the now Prime Minister stood up and told the nation that the government had lost its way, pledging to get government back on track and dealing with a range of challenges before them. As an election came and went, a new paradigm arose from the ashes of what Labor had left behind. We were erroneously led to believe that things may well be different. And one of the areas of different was about engagement, about engagement-led policies. A number of weeks ago, the opposition approached the government with respect to these range of bills to talk about engagement and how we would sit down with the government and have a discussion. To the minister's credit, we sat down, went through a range of issues. Minister Snowden was there, representatives from the Finance Minister was there. We outlined some issues and sought some information back again. We asked a range of questions. And 2 weeks has passed, and what have we heard from the Minister's office? Nothing. The information we requested and the Minister promised we would be provided, where has that materialised? Nowhere. Putting aside the fact that I can't take the Minister at his word, let's put that to one side. We sought to engage and have a responsible discussion to agree a position in the interests of the nation, and this government couldn't even be bothered to get back in contact with the opposition for further discussion. Well, if that's the game the government wants to play, if that's their concept of a new paradigm, if that's their idea of engagement as it leads to policy, then it is no doubt they are facing the demise that the front page of the papers currently point to. Which brings us to this bill, where the opposition has sought to engage, has sought to negotiate in good faith, and the government hasn't even bothered to respond. These bills, we're told, will merge the existing trustees for the Commonwealth civilian and military superannuation schemes into a single trustee body, the Commonwealth Superannuation Corporation, or CSC. They'll establish ComSuper as a statutory agency with a CEO and staff. And the function of ComSuper, of course, will provide administrative services to the CSC. The CEO is appointed by the Minister for Finance and Deregulation in consultation with the Minister for Defence. The CSC will be trustee for existing Commonwealth superannuation funds, including Commonwealth Superannuation Scheme, CSS, the Public Sector Superannuation Scheme, PSS, the Public Sector Superannuation Accumulation Plan, the Military Superannuation Benefit Scheme, Defence Force Retirement Death Benefit Scheme, Defence Force Retirement Benefit Scheme. The CSC board would consist of 11 members, an interesting choice for numbers of boards, appointed by the Minister for Finance and Deregulation. And it's here, Mr Deputy Speaker, that the full magnitude of what this government is proposing rears its ugly head. Of these 11 members of a board, 5 will be chosen in consultation between the Finance and Defence Ministers. 3 will be nominated by the President of the ACTU, the Australian Council of Trade Unions, of which they cannot be sacked. Only the President of the ACTU can remove them, thereby emasculating the Minister. 2 members nominated by the Chief of the Defence Force and 1 independent chair. 5 members. 3 ACTU. But it gets better, because a quorum is 9. Now name me a single board in this country that has a quorum of 9 out of 11. And where 3 of those members, which could knock out quorum, are from the ACTU that the Minister doesn't appoint and the Minister can't remove. So 3 people can knock out a quorum of a board sitting over Commonwealth funds, 3 people not chosen by the Minister, i.e. not chosen by an elected official, 3 people who can't be removed by the Minister, an elected official. Suddenly we'll have a huge bulk of Commonwealth funds effectively controlled by unelected officials, and that's a statement of fact. The bills also establish the Defence Force Case Assessment Panel. The panel will review any decision referred to it by the CSC relating to military matters such as death and disability pensions. The panel has been included in this version of the legislation as opposed to the legislation the government first introduced in the last parliament in response to concerns raised by stakeholders in the veteran and ADF community. Taken at face value, we agree with the establishment of such a panel. However, we're concerned that the CSC is not bound by any recommendations of that panel. It in effect can make it a toothless tiger when it comes to representing the interests of military personnel. These bills were first introduced in a slightly different form on the 4th of February 2010. They were passed by the House. The Coalition opposed them on the 2nd of June, and of course the bills lapsed with the proroguing of Parliament. At the time, the previous bills were amended in the House to slightly improve the board appointment process following from a Senate committee inquiry. The changes included requiring consultation with the Minister of Defence on employing board appointments and requiring at least one CDF-nominated director to be present where a reduced quorum in some circumstances is permissible and when issues to be discussed related only to military superannuation matters. Whilst the Coalition supported these minor amendments, we continued to oppose the bills because of the government's fanatical desire to have the ACTU representation. When these bills were originally introduced, that is in the last parliament, the Labor government had forgotten one thing, one tiny thing that they seemed to forget: to engage, to consult, to speak with the veteran and ex-service community who would be impacted by it. Not unusual in itself for this government, and it revealed a complete ignorance as to what is important to the veteran and ex-service community. The Labor-led Senate committee hearing into the bills largely whitewashed over the facts and the testimony given by key ex-service organisations, including the RSL and the Defence Force Welfare Association. Had the Labor government engaged with the veteran community, they would have quickly learnt that they would not tolerate the amalgamation of their super scheme with government civilian schemes if it meant that representation on the governing board was reduced or that the ACTU could effectively knock out a quorum of sittings. As it turned out, veterans and ex-service organisations were right to question the legislation. When these bills were introduced in the last parliament, the Labor government didn't just forget to talk to key stakeholders, namely the veteran community. It forgot to engage with the Coalition and has repeated the mistake once again. Last year in 11th hour negotiations, when the Labor government realised it would be held accountable for its bad legislation, it finally decided to engage. This time it did not. And that's where the problem remains. The Labor government didn't listen to concerns raised by the Coalition or the ex-service organisations. They didn't listen, but they caved into the ACTU. I guess there's a requirement to pay back the tens of millions of dollars the trade union movement pumped in to keeping this moribund Labor administration wobbly on at least one foot. Mr Speaker, with regard to the current legislation before the House, it's like deja vu all over again. Labor not speaking to the Coalition, one meeting held in good faith and no more, no questions answered, no engagement, information being requested, information promised, nothing coming up, no subsequent meetings, and the fundamental problems with the bill remain from the last iteration. Suffice to say, we strongly oppose the bills, not least of all because the Coalition will not support the dominant position given to the ACTU over both public service and military superannuation funds. We cannot and we will not support the ACTU being able to block quorums. We cannot and we will not support the ACTU not being appointed or being able to be removed by the Minister. And further, we will seek to introduce amendments to this bill which have now been circulated. To this, I hope that the Independents and the Greens will combine to knock out the bad parts of the bill. The disproportionate representation on the board of the ACTU is backed up by the rabble of a government saying that the ACTU are the employee representatives, therefore they should have the seat at the table. No one argues with the long-standing tradition of employee representatives having a seat at the table. The minister can appoint whoever he wants. So if the minister wishes to appoint people from the ACTU, the minister has the power to do that. No one is saying the minister should be stopped from appointing whoever he wants. Indeed, the minister could appoint 7 from the ACTU, if the minister so choose, because the minister should have the power to do that. But the sheer idea that in legislation the ACTU is given this kickback to say, here's 3 positions for you, and you also hold the position of quorum if you want to, is completely and utterly outrageous. The minister must have the power to appoint whom he or she wants on the board, whoever he or she deems fit to be the employee representatives. That is fair and that is just. And the opposition has no problem with that at all. But the idea of saying, well, ACTU, I know you represent only 14% of the private sector, 41% of the public sector, but you alone will be the employee representative. Forget the other 59% that decided that the union movement, especially the CPSU, is completely irrelevant to their lives and what they do. Forget that as a statement of fact. We'll still give you 3 plum positions. We will continue to oppose that. 11 members on the board. The minister should be able to appoint everyone on the board. The idea that the minister can't remove someone on the board, but that's delegated to someone, in this case the president of the ACTU, makes a mockery of elected officials accountable at the ballot box for their decisions, being able to hire and fire on Commonwealth boards. Simply put, this bill gives excessive power to the ACTU with regards to board appointments, termination of board members and quorum arrangements for board meetings. The minister and the minister alone should make the appointments, and they shouldn't be outsourced to their all-powerful backers, the ACTU. The current legislation still contains provisions which make it unacceptable to the defence and veteran communities. Only 41% of public servants are members of a union. Why should 41% of public servants choosing to join a union have 100% of employee representations on the new board? How are the other 59% of public servants who are not members of a union represented under the government model? Surely the government, as they said in 2007, I'll be a Prime Minister for all Australians, or was that the last Prime Minister? Surely that means the minister should appoint all the board members to represent all the constituents who are involved in the in the superannuation funds within the ComSuper. We've raised these concerns with the government, who are nevertheless pressing ahead with their current model. As was the case when this legislation was introduced in the last parliament, the Labor government has made it clear it is unwilling to engage on this legislation. The unions embedded as a right in the legislation seems to be an absolute and utter article of faith to this government. The government should come up with a governance model which is more representative of the diversity of public sector employees' backgrounds and perspectives. And indeed, the government should have engaged with the coalition, come back with responses to questions so that we could have reached an agreed position. Minister. The major issues, in summary, with this bill remain the ACTU representation on the board. We will oppose today, we will oppose tomorrow and the next day the privileged treatment of the union movement that occurs every day with this government. We will oppose it.
Members
Board
on
members
my right will
should be appointed by the Minister of Finance in